going to be the question, the central question is, how do Americans react to all this modernization? How do people respond to economic change and political change and social change? And it raises the question of American politics. And if you are reading this quote at all from Robert Levy's book, politics is not a place where you're going to see the best and the brightest. It is largely kind of, in the 19th century at least, going into the 20th century, you don't really care who your senator is. First of all, you didn't vote for them. They were appointed by the state legislator, right? You don't really know who your senator is. You don't really know, you don't care about your federal representation. Yeah, people would vote on national elections because it was fun to vote, and reasons I'll talk about why it was fun to vote. But it wasn't as driving as an issue as we see ourselves today, right? Today, when someone says, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm an independent, it's largely in regards to national politics. That's not the case. This is going to change. And as I suggested, one of the things that's going to happen is you're going to have a pushback from a population and from locations like Texas to all of this modernization that we've been talking about. There's William McKinley, about a year later, he's going to be shot and killed, fourth of 4 presidents since 1860 to die in office, one of the most dangerous. What role does politics, what does it mean to have politics, right? Politics isn't everything. Politics is about power, right? So there's sexual politics, racial politics, youth politics, Twitter politics, whatever. If it involves power, it's political, right? And so in this case, politics is only meaningful at the national level if there's something that they're doing, right? If they're involved in someone's life. It doesn't matter. There was no income tax, right? How much economic involvement did you have in the federal government in your economic life? 0. They didn't care how much you made. They didn't care how much you didn't make or whatever. What issues do the two parties take up, and why are there, more importantly, just two parties? And what happens when you get a population like Texas farmers who are saying, you can see what's going on in Ottawa, in Canada, right? Of mass opposition, of farmers locking down the capital of Canada, shutting down bridge access. What happens when that population is saying, you know what? I'm not an immigrant. I'm not a former slave. I'm not a Catholic or a Jew. And again, I recognize that though it shouldn't matter, but in the 1890s it did. Right? I'm not one of these people. My grandfather fought in the Revolution. My father fought in the Civil War. Right? I have rights as an American citizen. They have quote unquote standing. And they're opposed to these changes that we've been talking about. What happens then? Right? That's why and how you're going to see this political change kind of take root in the United States. All right. Gilded Age politics is this wacky period of time, and again, we have these weird comparisons. There's not a strong, dominant Republican or Democratic party. If you went through the presidents, you would see kind of the switch back and forth, Republican, Democrat, Bush, and then Obama, and then Trump, and then Biden, right? And it's kind of analogous. That's not the way in which American politics typically works in the 20th century. Many of these presidents are going to win without winning the popular vote. So they're going to win by the Electoral College, not because 3 times that's going to happen during a 35-year period of time, where you've got someone winning the election and not, again, Trump did that, Bush did that in 2004, where you have, in essence, the winner because of the electoral systems. And both of the parties are pretty similar in terms of their approach. I know people who are really into Fox and MSNBC are like, oh, the Republicans and Democrats, we hate each other. In political theory, what the Republicans and Democrats stand for, there's not a big difference between the two, right? There just isn't. It's all what baseball hat you wear, right? It's all if you say all y'all, or if you don't, or if you listen to John Barney, or whatever, right? It's cultural, right? It's, again, similar here. The Republican and Democratic parties are not all that different in terms of the policies that they stand for. Local politics matters a lot more. And we'll talk about why that is in just a second. It is true that most of their men look like this. So Grover Cleveland was single, ladies. I don't know if the Ned look is for you. He gets married while he's president. He also has a separate term, right? So if you're a Trump fan, you can look and say, Grover Cleveland was elected and then he booted out and then elected again, separate. He didn't do 8 years consecutively. His daughter, by the way, was in office as he's president. The wife has a baby, Ruth, and hence the candy bar. Right? Candy bar comes from Baby Ruth, comes from this guy. So I don't know if he's an attractive. You can swipe right on this guy or not, but we'll do that for another part. Why are there no third parties? The last successful third party in this country was the Republican Party in 1854. That is a long time ago. Right? And everyone has friends. I'm going to vote third party. I'm going to this. I'm going to that. I'm going to vote third party. They never work. Why? There are two types of democracies on the planet. Most of them are parliamentary. England, France, Germany, Japan, Brazil, Mexico, Canada. A parliamentary system, in essence, says to you as the voter, you don't have to compromise. If you want to vote for a green, Bernie Sanders clone, whatever, you want to vote for the Blanqui Party, right? If you want to vote for, I want this idiot who teaches history to be an elected official, okay, fine. You can be as doctrinaire as possible. Right? I'm only voting for somebody with a Trump as a last name, right? Or Don or whatever. You can do that, and even the smallest amount of representation is going to get you a representative in Congress. I think there's a threshold that's like 3%, something like that. But if 3% of the national vote says, we want Blanqui in there, sure, we'll toss him in there. All of a sudden, I'm one of 460 representatives. Am I going to pass anything? Am I going to legislate anything? Am I going to say everyone must take 3 years of history? No, because I'm one out of many, many. What do I have to do if I'm elected in a parliamentary system? I have to compromise. The elected representative has to compromise. That isn't the case. We have something called a winner-take-all political system. It is written into the Constitution in the way in which we operate. Which means what? If you get 50% plus one vote, you get it all. Right? How much power did Hillary Clinton get? Right? 0. How much power did Donald Trump get after the last election? 0. You lose, you get nothing. Right? Now, Republicans and Democrats recognize that and are going to accentuate the differences between the two parties. If you don't vote for us, you're going to lose things. Right? This distinction is going to make it very hard for third parties to step in. Why? Because the third party may say, I'm going to forgive student loan debt. I'm going to have a clean, Green New Deal. I'm going to have, guns in every kindergarten. I'm going to do whatever you want to do in terms of your policy. But you don't get political power. It's very rare to see that transition take place. What takes place is the parties themselves change from within. So since 2008, the Republican Party is completely different than what it was in 2007. Completely, 180 degrees, right? Ronald Reagan would not get elected today by the Republican Party. Right? And the same thing is true. Franklin Roosevelt wouldn't get elected by today's Democrat. So that distinction is one that changes the political parties. What those political parties recognize is that people are in politics for a reason. You are politically activated, and again, today there's a little asterisk because it's so culturally motivated. Because that's how I talk. That's the music I listen to. Right? It's the cultural stuff that's taken over our lives. But in these days, you're looking and saying, there's something that I'm getting in return. I am a Democrat because it's going to protect minimum wage or 40-hour work week or unions are going to be supported. I'm a Republican because I want to be able to have low taxes and low regulation. 1980s argument. It's nowhere to be found anymore. Right? Who talks about that shit anymore? It's all culture. It's all God, gun, and religion. God, gays, and guns, right? That this is all about material interests. And if you lose the election, so the spoil system says, in essence, if you lose the election, you lose something. Right? Classic example of that used to be the tax write-off you used to do for personal property. You own a home, you pay taxes on your mortgage, which you do, right? You can write that all off. Who's going to vote for a politician that says, we really should get rid of that? Nobody. Because it's in their own economic interest. That's why you generally turn out. And the system itself in the 1900s is going to reinforce that. So this is election day in New York City, an example of quote-unquote honest graft. Graft is stealing. Right? So the argument here is this is honest stealing. Don't worry about it, we're stealing. It's maybe NASCAR or something like that. You're not cheating, you're not trying. What election day is in essence, you can see these guys, they're all men, are lined up over here. Maybe American citizens, maybe registered voters, who knows, right? They are waiting to get up to, as you can see here in the front, a whole bunch of cattle being barbecued, right? So a whole bunch of brisket. And what you can't see, although there's some of it over here, are beer kegs, right? There's one. You can see them rolling them in over here, right? And in essence, what they're given, I don't know if you can have a piece of paper here that would reflect that. The Republicans and Democrats, you go into archives, you see all kinds of this. I don't have a piece of colored paper. But they would give you a ballot. And usually the ballot was, you know, a long strip. Republicans tended to use yellow, I don't know why. This long strip of yellow paper, and it would have all of the Republican candidates. They would hand you this piece of paper. They say, hope you enjoyed your brisket, hope you enjoyed your beer. Now show up over here and vote for our candidate. Right? Why? What are you going to give me in return? Well, on the one hand, you just got brisket and beer for the first time in probably a couple of weeks. Right? But if your brother-in-law can't hold a job, we'll employ him in streets and sanitation. If your mom is about to be evicted, we'll step in and make sure that she doesn't lose her farm. Very often they'll distribute hams or Easter turkeys or things like that. Christmas was not a big celebration. Easter, you know, surprise, surprise, Christians. Easter is really the big celebration for Christianity. And they would, you know, you're poor, you don't have the ability to have a ham or a turkey or something like that. They would distribute. Is that worth your vote? If you got nothing else, sure. And if you had somebody who you could go to, if you're an immigrant, if you're, and again, it doesn't, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. Right? Some cities, Dallas was Republican, Houston was Democrat. They followed the exact same rules. Would you be willing to vote for a third party if you're gonna lose these real basic ideas? You're not. Why? Why risk it? Right? These aldermen, these local councilmen are local. They know your name. They know where you go to school. They know your family. They're there to help you deal with modernization. We look at this today and go, well, this is corruption. Right? The progressives who are on the horizon here in the 19th, oh, well, this is corrupt. Yeah, it's honest graft, right? And again, maybe it's because I'm from Chicago and I live in Texas, where it's like, you know, politics is about local. Politics is about what you need as a society and what society is willing to do. It isn't necessarily this kind of hard and fast. And again, as we're going to see, what the progressives are going to do is to basically make it easy for the middle class and upper middle class to vote, and for poor people to, you know, we don't care. What's going to happen to voting turnout? It's going to plummet. Why show up if it doesn't make your life any different? If it doesn't make any difference in your own life. So the 19th century Gilded Age is kind of dominated by this. And normally I would focus on these issues in detail. I'm not going to do that. I've stopped doing that a couple of years ago. I would have, you know, slides for each one of them. At the national level, right, and I'll let you read these on your own, but the civil service reform, tariff reform, what you'll notice here is that number 2, 3, and 4 are both about economic changes in the United States, and whether and if the federal government is going to intervene to have sort of a level playing field. One of the ones that we're going to get down here is currency reform, is whether or not we're going to stay on the gold standard or actually use two metals, gold and silver, as ways in which to approximate the value of a dollar bill. Right? And so they're kind of arcane, and they are arcane debates. No one cares about them. But the question down here, are any of these really important to the average American? Do any of these make a difference in terms of your effect in modernization? If you're Charlie Chaplin on the assembly line, does it make a difference that they're regulating grain elevators or anything like that? No. And so in essence, what you see is this rising pressure. Nobody's doing anything about industrialization. Nobody's doing anything about the economic changes that are forcing people to go and work in industry, work in these cities, leave the farms, etc. And you don't have a spokesperson, a group that has legitimacy. The people who are largely being harmed by this are women, people of color, immigrants, those who are easily ignored by the political process. Until you get these guys, right? So locked down. Until you get these guys right here. Farmers, right? One of the three most recognized American paintings is Grant Wood's American Gothic, right? It's ironic. Most people think it's a man and his wife. It's his daughter. And Wood is recognized, he understands he's from that region. There's a lot of jokes about the farmer's daughter. The Gothic comes from the Gothic architecture behind them. But Wood is playing around with all of these kinds of assumptions of rural America, godlike, and yet, all that kind of stuff. He's carrying a pitchfork. You can see that theme kind of picked up again in his overalls. Who else notoriously carries a pitchfork? Get his work done. Beelzebub, Satan, right? And so there's all these kinds of jabs. He's a rural Midwesterner, the painter, and so he's kind of making fun of his own folks. But when you think about rural America, at least during this period of time, you don't think about radical. You don't think about politically outside of the economic system. Right? And when you talk about these farm populations, they see themselves just like laborers. They see themselves as producers. Here is a patch of dirt, and pretty soon I'm going to turn that dirt into something you can feed your family. You may be a doctor or a lawyer or a politician, I don't care, but you're going hungry if I don't produce this wealth. The system falls apart if you don't have producers. That is the exact same argument that labor unions are going to make, and as you're going to see, they're going to proudly call themselves unions. Right? Again, culturally, oh my God, how can that possibly be? Farmers, is definitely deserves air quotes. Farmers are regionally different. Texans, you should know this. Right? If I was to say I'm going to give you 160 acres to go farm, your first question should be where? Right? Because in West Texas, that ain't going to cut it. East Texas, maybe. Right? Regionally, there's different products, there's different labor systems. What they share, what historians claim through the evidence that they share, is a sense of rural republicanism. It's not a political party. Republicanism is about what values are necessary to support a healthy democracy. Right? And you can see the list here, right? Virtue, commonwealth, this means everybody is in it together. You don't see that so much anymore, right? Because culturally, they wear the wrong baseball caps. Equality, citizenship, independence. And independence is an economic argument. Thomas Jefferson, you know that period of time, I know that. Thomas Jefferson talked about the yeoman farmer, right? And it's not a hip-hop, group back in the day. The yeoman farmer, someone who's independent economically, that they don't have to vote because their boss is going to put the squeeze on them. They don't have to vote because they're going to get free beer and brisket. They don't have to vote because their brother-in-law can't hold a job. They're independent. So they see themselves as being, in essence, a voice of ethics, a voice of saying, here's where America lives, here's where society is the strongest. And its expression, political expression, is called populism. We live in an era right now of populism. And this guy to the left, William Jennings Bryan, is going to be the representative of the Democratic Party, who's often seen as the populist. And the thing I always want to point out is that this populist movement is going to, by the time we get to the 20th century, is largely going to be ignored. They're going to look at this and go, well, these old-timers, these people, I forgot to bring the book in that talks about it, but the first line of his book is that this book is about the loss of freedom and independence in America. We don't like to read that. The 20th century is looking back at these 19th century farmers and going, oh, they were just bitching about industrialization. They were just bitching about the fact they didn't want to have cell phones and have cars and have IOUs and bank accounts and all the rest of that stuff. When in fact, they had a choice, right? The reason why I show this image is because in essence, you can see Bryan here, so he's standing right there, is going to represent at the last of his career. He switches from being a politician, he runs for president not once, not twice, but 3 times, loses all 3. He kind of steps away from politics and he's a devout Christian and becomes sort of the circuit preacher, talkless and talks and what have you. But by 1923, a vocal opponent of the theory of evolution. And the Scopes monkey trial, whether or not you can teach evolution in a history or in a science class, right? Again, sound familiar, right? Whether you can teach race in a history class, that in essence he is going to defend the state of Tennessee's law, which prohibits that. He's going to go on, this is broadcast on national radio. Everybody's listening because it's William Jennings Bryan. And he is going to, in essence, shoot his foot off on the stand. He's going to be asked about creation because he's a biblical expert. And how long did it take? And he said, well, I don't know how long it took. The first day of creation, there's no sun, there's no earth. God just is formless, and all of a sudden there's something. Right? How long was that? And they asked Bryan, was it 24 hours? Could it be 25 hours? Sure, it could be 25 hours. Could it be 26 hours? Yeah, why not 26 hours? There's no sun, there's no earth. Could it be 26 billion years? No, it can't be that. Why? Because I say so. Oh, so you get to say what interpretation. Darwin can't say it. This guy in jail can't say it, but William Jennings Bryan can say it's 26 or 27 hours, right? He's embarrassed. The state of Tennessee still wins the case. And then he famously, infamously, falls over dead 2 days after the trial. So if you want to really have a legacy, have a Michaela Schifrin moment and then fall over dead 2 days later, right? And in essence, that's what Bryan does. He seals the reputation of this populist movement as being this cultural, shit-covered farmers who don't know what they're talking about, pitchforks, and, you know, guys in the highway with their cars, you know, in Ottawa. Even today, you get a sense of that. You get this kind of, well, these people really aren't kind of sophisticated. They're just truck drivers. And that component is going to be incorrect in terms of the ways in which it's interpreted. All right, rural unrest and populism. Here is an important point moving forward. That means what? That means in 1302 you have these things called exams. You may see this again. Is that there are two types of populism. The one we're talking about here is economic populism. Populism at its core says what the government should be for is the greatest good for the greatest men. We the people, first words of the United States Constitution. That the government should be aiding economically. Its policy should do no harm to the average American population. By contrast, and that's largely what we're going to be looking at. These areas, you know, Tea Party, arguably, Occupy Wall Street, Bernie Sanders. In a sense, the origins of Trump in 2008, although that was, you know, again, there's a lot of asterisks in that. This notion of economic unfairness, the top and the bottom. There's also cultural populism. That's where we are right now. Real Americans. What are real Americans? Well, turn on TV and they'll tell you, here's what a real American is. Here's what they look like. Here's what they sound like. Really? According to who? According to me. Boy, you sound like William Jennings Bryan all of a sudden, right? What if somebody else has a different idea? What if another American decides, you know what I like? I don't like that kind of music. I like, you know. Well, then you're un-American. That's cultural populism, right? What's going on here is, in essence, playing off of these changes. Things are changing rapidly, and those changes are producing anxieties in the American public. And when we get back together on Friday, I'll get through